When did you see the game, and when did you kind of find a comfort in that? When did you see the game as far as
when did this
guys start to shift where they had to make the play as well?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I came in 03 where there was still two bigs on the block. You know, you still had teams with two bigs on the block, and there was not a lot of space out there. And for the first few months of my rookie season, I did start at point guard. You know, I started at point guard alongside, Ricky Davis was our two guard, Darius Miles, Carlos Boozer, and just Junior Selgauskas, and I was the point guard. So, I knew that, coming in that I was have to get guys shots. You said it. You said in the 95 season, there was one guy that was in the top 10 scoring that averaged over 5 assists, and that was MJ. I always thought to myself when I was growing up just watching basketball, his name was the shooting guard because he was the one that was shooting the damn ball.
Right?
And the point guard, when you watch it, me and my guys always talk about when you're growing up watching the game, there was literally only maybe two guys ever bringing the ball up, and that was the starting point guard and the backup point guard. Right. There was not many guys bringing the ball up. If you watch some of the 80s games and even some of the early 90s games, like if you watch the Knicks, when they have, Mark Jackson, John Starks never brought the ball up. Yeah. Pat Ewing never got a rebound and busted out on the break. Right. When even when Mark went to Indiana, Reggie he never really brought the ball up. Right. And obviously Rick Smits and Dale Davis, those guys didn't bust out on the break. No. You had those guys. It was the point guard. He brings the ball up. He gets everybody involved. He knows where guys should be, how they should move. He knows the system by a T. And then, the game started to shift. I think, obviously, you had guys like Grant Hill and Scottie Pippen, Tony Kukoc. Yeah. You had these bigger, longer wings. Point forwards, that started to change the game. But it was still minute. Even in the 90s, it was not many guys. There was outliers. But then you started to have the early 2000s, and then when I started coming to the league, you had the Tracy McGrady's. Kobe would bust out. Once I moved over and started playing the wing, then I started to be more of a point forward. And the game started to shift. I believe, probably late teens. Obviously, what you guys doing in Phoenix. You guys had multiple bust out guys. Some, Tricks would, get the rebound and bust it out, and if you were ahead, he would throw it up ahead to you. Joe Johnson, could being a 6'6" wing, but could bust out. And the game just started to shift, and the way you guys played, the way at times that San Antonio played when they decided that Timmy was just going to be the 5. Yeah. Then they started to realize, okay, we need to create more space for Timmy. And then that's when you had Tony, Manu, Michael Finley at times. They brought in McDyess, to give them more space. The game started to change then, I would say, late in the teens. And our league, it's a copycat league. Sure. One team do it with success, okay, then everybody starts to see if they have that one player where now we can surround him with space. Right. And the game started to shift to, like you said, in 2025, now there's 8 guys out of the top 10 scoring with 5 assists per game or more. Right. Because now. And by the way, it's not 5. It's that now all of them are 6, 7, 8 assists. Yeah, exactly. Right? And that just comes from now the responsibility of the main player and the responsibility of the guy that handles the ball. Not only are you're responsible for scoring and putting us into action, you're also responsible for getting guys involved as well. Because the defense is going to attract, there's a lot of double teaming before you even get into the action. Guys come across half court. Guys are double team Steph Curry as soon as he crosses half court. Right. We're not waiting for Draymond to come up into the pick and roll. Right. We're gonna try to get the ball out your hands now.